We did a little bit about the risk management concepts and all that. And today we have to learn a little bit about the ERM frameworks. So in the CIA literature, there are two frameworks that they refer to. One is the COSO Committee of Sponsoring Organizations framework, COSO ERM framework, and the other one is the ISO, International Standard of Organization, ISO 31000 framework. But the main framework that they delve deeply into is the COSO framework. So most of these slides from 20 to 50 would be on the COSO framework, and then there will be about a few slides on ISO. So let's go through these slides quickly. Enterprise risk management, integrating with strategy and performance, is a framework that complements and incorporates some concepts of the COSO internal control framework. So COSO have published two frameworks. One is the internal control framework, other one is the ERM framework. So there are two frameworks. The COSO here, we are talking about the ERM framework and not the internal control framework. So there are common aspects to both. I think we discussed it last time. The COSO ERM framework provides a basis for coordinating and integrating all of an organization's risk management activities. If you are planning on introducing risk management to your organization, you can use either framework because it helps to put in place the structures, the authorities, the processes, the reporting requirements, and all that related to managing risk. So provides a basis, it's a framework that provides a basis for coordinating and integrating all of an organization's risk management activities. So it takes on an enterprise-wide holistic approach rather than a silo approach to each department, because managing risk at the end of the day is everyone's responsibility. And it's not limited to the risk management department. It has to be embedded into day-to-day activities. So as you can see on the slide, it says here, it integrating all of an organization's risk management activity. So this interconnectivity is very important to preventing it from being a siloed approach. So it improves decision making, obviously, because if you have an ERM framework, before you make any decision, you will always look into the risk aspect before making a decision. It enhances performance, obviously, because if decision making, you consider risk always, and then you will most likely put in place, make decisions which are more suitable or within the risk appetite of the organization. And also risk management, we discussed, I think last week, that risk management is all about controlling risk so that the chances of achieving an organization's KPIs objectives are enhanced. So naturally, risk management enhances performance. It better enables you to or enhances the chances of meeting your strategic goals, objectives, KPIs, etc. Because you are now managing risks. Managing risk is about, controlling all the impediments, the difficulties, controlling risk events so that they do not impede or hamper the achievement of an objective that is set by the board or management. So ERM is based on the premise that every organization exists to provide value for its stakeholders. So if you look at the overall, why is ERM important? It's all about preserving value and enhancing value. So that is the overarching objective of risk management, preserving value for obviously its stakeholders, not only the shareholders, but you have customers, suppliers, employees, the wider community at large, and maybe there may be other regulators and all that. So it's all about preserving value and also enhancing value. So ERM, how is it defined? The culture, can you see? There has to be a risk culture in the organization. The capabilities, the competent people, and the practices, the processes, integrated with strategy setting and performance. So culture, capabilities, and practices. There's no point having the capabilities, maybe the software, the hardware, and the humanware. No point having the capabilities if you don't have a right culture. And no point having a culture and the right software, hardware, and humanware without having the proper processes. Processes of identifying risk, processes of evaluating risk. So processes must be there. Processes have to be there, right? And all these things at the end of the day must be integrated with strategy setting. That's very important when you are setting your strategic goals. All that, this risk aspect has to be thought of, and performance. So it's always linked to strategy setting and performance that organizations rely on to manage risk. So it's about managing risk. So the culture, so ERM, what is that? It consists of culture. Culture is the, how people, whether people are risk averse, whether they are risk aggressive, whether they take into consideration the risk aspect when they perform their activities, whether they are aware of their role in risk, the fact that they shouldn't be taking on doing things which pose a significant risk to the organization. So that culture must be there, right? And then culture, capabilities, practices, and all these things must not happen at a divisional level, but must be at a strategy level, performance level, right? So it's the collection of culture, capabilities, and practices which are linked to strategy setting and performance that are relied upon in managing risk. And why you manage risk is to create, preserve, and realize value. It's all about value. So if they have an MCQ question on risk management, just look for the word value, preservation of value, creation of value, realizing value, enhancing value. That's what you do. And it's a collection of culture, capabilities, and practices. But it cannot be at a very, what you call at a lower level. It has to be at the highest level, which is strategy setting and performance. I can remember once there was a strategic plan sent to the central bank or company, and they sent, your plan is good, but what are the risks? You have not identified the risks in your strategy. So then we have to identify risks and send it back. The risk aspect must be considered. So now let's look at these culture, capabilities, practices, what it could mean, the various elements in that difference. So culture considers the attitudes, behaviors, and understanding about risk. What sort of attitude and behavior does the staff exhibit on a day-to-day? Are they callous? Are they negligent? Do they understand what risk is all about? Do they understand their role in risk management? But it can be positive and negative that influence decisions management and personally reflect the mission, vision, and core values. So culture at the end of the day is about attitudes, behavior, understanding about risk, right? And all those things basically stem from your mission, vision, values, and all that, What is your vision? What is your mission? If you have a crazy vision or a mission which kind of promotes risk-taking, then of course your culture will also be suitably risk-aggressive. You shouldn't be risk-averse. That is, you shouldn't have a culture where you don't take risks. But that doesn't mean that you must be risk-aggressive, where you take risks. It has to be a balance, somewhere in between. Because if you don't take risk and reward go together, The higher the risk, the higher the reward. So you have to take risk. But otherwise you won't have a proper reward, but it has to be balanced. So mission is the core purpose that we all know why an organization exists, by vision, mission. Vision is the organization's aspiration. This is where so mission is why we exist as a company. Vision is your future, where you want to be, kind of thing. Core values also, you know what it is, your beliefs. Values stem from your religion, values stem from your school life, from your home life. And then the organization also similarly has its own values that it promotes, believes what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. I mean, it can be related to honesty, integrity, teamwork, mutual support. There can be so many different types of values, but you are looking at the ERM aspects of a company, then this basically tells you have to look at the mission, vision, and core values and see whether it is in alignment with, as I said, if you have inappropriate mission, vision, or inappropriate values, then managing risk is going to be difficult because it has an impact. It will have an impact on the culture of the organization, the risk culture. Capabilities are skills needed to carry out the entity's mission and vision. So capabilities are required. Competencies of people. You can have a good culture, but if you don't have competent people to identify risks, if they do not have the required technical skills on ERM concepts, if they are not knowledgeable, if they are not experienced, if they are not using the correct software, so then that's going to be a problem. So capabilities are required. Otherwise, your ERM is going to fail. Practices are the collective methods used to manage risks. Those are the processes and all that, tools, processes. It can be integrating strategy and setting and performance. So let's look at that. Risk must be considered in setting strategy, business objectives, KPIs, and tolerance. So the simple strategy communicates how the organization will. So you have a mission, vision, and you have strategic goals. The strategy will tell how you're going to achieve that goal. Objectives based on the strategic goals, departments might have objectives. So strategic goals, strategic KPIs, business objectives, all to some extent a little overlapping, but then for the company, you will have your strategic KPIs, and then each department will have KPIs aligned to those, divisional KPIs aligned to those strategic KPIs. That when the IT department achieves its KPIs, it will help the organization in achieving its KPIs. Tolerance is the range of acceptable variation in performance results, right? So risk tolerance is defined as the range of acceptable variation in performance result. And this, I think I explained to you, is risk appetite and risk tolerance, where if you're going in a vehicle, if the maximum on the highway is 100 km, then the risk appetite is 0 to 100. But above 100 to 110 also, that you can vary a little bit. You might not get caught to the police. So that is the risk tolerance. So risk appetite is 0 to 100 km, 100 km to 110 km might be the tolerance. Acceptable variation. That is the acceptable variation. That is the easiest way to remember that. The organization considers the effect of strategy on its risk profile and portfolio view. Risk profile is a composite view of the type, severity, and interdependencies of the risks related to a specific strategy. So when you prepare a strategic plan, you will have your strategic risks identified. So all these risks together will form a kind of a portfolio, and you will see your risk profile. So that would be another way you will have to set risk appetites. A risk profile may be created at any level, entity level, divisional level, operating. So this risk profile generally at the end of the day is in the form of a risk register and a risk appetite statement. Portfolio view is similar to a risk profile. The difference is that it is a composite view of the risk related to entity-wide. So portfolio view is like you have entity-wide. Strategy is little at a higher level. So these are theoretical stuff. Just go through the So portfolio view, risk profile. They might ask you, and they might have an MCQ on it. So risk profile is a composite view of the type, severity, and interdependencies of risks related to a specific strategy. You have a strategy. What are the strategic risks that you have? And there are some are related, interdependent. There are various types, set collection. But they're all linked to a specific strategy or a specific business objective, right? From portfolio view is like, having a investment portfolio. You have invested in FDs, you have invested in treasury bills bonds. So it's again is that it is a composite view of the risks related to entity-wide strategies. It's more or less the same thing, but at a higher level, and business object and their effects on entity performance. If you look at both, this is more at a portfolio is definitely at a entity-wide strategy. Here also you have entity, however. Can you see? Then it's related to business objectives and effects on entity performance, and the effect on performance. It's related to a specific strategy, right? But it is a composite view of the risks, the composite view of the types and severity and the dependencies. So slight deviations, slight differences. Risk is any event that will occur and affect the achievement of. So you have strategies, strategic goals, KPIs, business objectives. So any event that will occur and affect the achievement of a objective would be a risk. So risk is any event or any issue that will have an adverse impact on the achievement of strategy. Opportunity is any action or potential that creates or alters goals or approaches for the creation preservation. So opportunity is any potential action that creates. So the organizations need to capitalize on opportunities. That will only help the organization to create, preserve, or realize value. But at the same time, they have to look at the risk aspect. If they take on this opportunity, what are the events that could impact on the organization? Managing risk. Effective ERM practices provide reasonable expectation that the risk assumed is appropriate. Obviously, risk management is all about giving reasonable assurance to the board that objectives will be achieved. Not absolute assurance, but reasonable assurance. And ERM is all about ensuring that the residual risk that remains, you have the inherent risk, you put in place the control or the risk treatment, then what is left is the residual risk. And that residual risk has to be always at an acceptable level or within the risk appetite of the organization. Target residual risk is the risk the entity prefers to assume, knowing that management has acted on the matter. So before putting in place a risk response, you have the inherent risk. Inherent risk is the risk without putting in place any control. Once you put a risk response, there are different types of risk responses or risk treatments. Once you put that in place, then what is left is the target residual risk. Now, what is risk appetite? Risk appetite consists of the amount of risk, type of risk the organization is willing to accept in the pursuit of value or in the pursuit of its objectives. Now, banks and all have a very good risk appetite statement. Similarly, in your organization also, you must look at the possibility of developing risk appetite statements. Basically, it tells you will, for various KPIs or key risk indicators, this is the range that is acceptable to you. If it goes outside of that range, then problem. You'll take major action to bring it within. Right. So risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk the organization can assume. So again, risk maximum amount of risk the organization can assume. So risk has a range, risk appetite has a range. So this would be the upper range, more or less. So if you see the word maximum amount of risk the organization can assume, that will be risk capacity. Then if you see amount and type of risk the organization is willing to accept in the pursuit of value or in the pursuit of its strategic goals, that would be risk appetite. So the small differences, but you need to know it for MCQs. Risk inventory is all the risks that have been identified. The risk register, all the risks. If you look at your risk registers, it will contain all the risks that the organization has identified. So these concepts you have to know. One, that risk management is all about providing reasonable assurance or reasonable expectation that the organization will achieve its goals. Right? Or in another way, you can say that risk management is all about ensuring that the organization keeps risks at an appropriate level or within the risk appetite. Risk appetite can consider the different types, the different amounts of risk organization is willing to accept in the pursuit of value. Right? Because certain risks they will never accept. It's too much. It's too much. They can't accept it. So what are the parameters? The upper end would be the risk capacity maximum level. Right? Risk response is an action taken to bring identified risks within the organization's risk appetite. Can you see? Risk responses are very, very important. They come in the form of controls mostly. There are different types of risks. You can pass on the risk to someone else, insurer. A residual risk profile includes risk responses. Target residual risk is what we try to achieve, and that has to be within the risk appetite. Right? So value is also, can you remember we said ERM is all about creating value, preserving value, realizing value. So value is created when the benefits obtained from the resources used exceed their cost. Obviously, when the cost, everything has a cost benefit, benefits exceed cost, there is value created. Preserved when the value of resources used is sustained. Okay. Realized when benefits are transferred to stakeholders. So benefits have to be transferred to stakeholders. If I'm a shareholder, I have to get a dividend. It's a benefit realized. Eroded when management strategy does not produce expected results. So just go through these words. Right. So creation is about benefits exceeding their cost. Preservation is about sustaining. Realizing is about actually a stakeholder getting the benefit. Benefit transfer. Erosion is diminishing, does not produce the expected results. Right. So here again, I have seen a few MCQs at the exam. They might suddenly ask you, when benefits are transferred to stakeholders, when you talk about value, that would be what? The transfer, when you see the word transfer to stakeholder, that is realization. Creation, benefits exceed their costs. So you have benefits of using resources, no? Benefits from resources. You have resources. To buy the resources or to make the resources, it costs something, but you sell it and you get the benefit out of it. So obviously benefits must exceed costs. Right? ERM roles, everyone has a role. If you look at the ERM policy of an organization, you will see that board has a role, risk oversight role. They must oversee the culture, capabilities, and practices. So this culture, capability, and practices you have to always think about, because when you do an ERM audit, you have to look at what sort of culture do they have, in terms of capabilities, what do they have, and practices. So when you study the framework, you'll know how to check that. So some companies, banks have an integrated risk management committee, IRMC, integrated risk management committee. So conglomerates, they might have an ERM committee, but at board level, sometimes the audit committee plays the role of a risk committee. So audit committee also plays a role in risk. You might have a separate board subcommittee for risk, like in banks, it's called IRMC. Then at Management level heads a committee headed by the CEO, where the secretary is the CRO. You might have a risk committee at executive level, an executive compensation committee. Okay, and nomination. So these are the kinds of board sub-level committees. No, one is audit committee, two is IRMC, three is then the remuneration committee, and four is the governance committee. So they all play a role in risk management, but below this at management level also they might have a ERM committee. Yeah, that's what I thought. Number two was earlier. They might have. So here they are talking about 1, 2, 3, 4. They are all board subcommittees. So each subcommittee has a role, no? If you look at the nominations committee also, it's about ensuring that there is succession, ensuring that there is proper people are nominated into key management roles and directorships. If the wrong people, incapable people come in, then definitely it's going to have an impact on the organization. So this is at board level. A is at board level, right? So all these board subcommittees have a role to play in terms of risk oversight, not management, risk oversight. But what do they have to oversee? The culture, capabilities, and practices. Then you have at management level, right? Corporate level. Management has overall responsibility for ER. So who has overall responsibility for ER? Management. Who has overseen responsibility? Oversight responsibility? That will be the board and its subcommittees. And is generally responsible for day-to-day managing of risk, including the implementation and development of the course of framework. Can you see? So the management has overall responsibility for ER, headed by the CEO. That could be an MCQ question. So when you see the word overall, sometimes you might go and select board. No, overall responsibility for ERM, implementing course of framework, developing course of framework, day-to-day managing of risk, managing, not day-to-day. Anything else is managing of risk. That is the management's responsibility. Within management, the CEO has ultimate responsibility for ERM and achievement of strategy and business objectives. So the CEO has a lot of responsibility there within management. An organization may designate a risk officer as a centralized coordinator. So this is the CRO. CRO is like the chief risk officer, chief risk consultant who will coordinate all activities. But CRO is not responsible for, he facilitates. Can you see? It's a coordinating point to facilitate risk management. So the CRO's job is not risk management. Management is up to the CEO and the department. CRO plays a coordinating role, facilitating role. It's very, very important. And he's like a chief consultant on methodology, on risk reporting. He might compile risk reports. He might be the secretary of the risk committee. He might be the one who introduces the risk methodology. He might be the chief risk consultant giving advice to the management on the way management identifies risk or evaluates risk. So can you see the risk officer, chief risk officer is in the second line of defense, not in the first line. So the first line of defense only, these are the owners of risk. First line are the owners of risk. They manage performance and risks taken to achieve. So first line are the heads of division, or if you take various divisions, then the CRO's responsibility. The owners of risk are the heads of the department. Their subordinates create risk. So the first line of defense are the owners of risk. Second line of defense are the supporting functions. CRO, sometimes finance also is considered to be in second line, quality assurance, compliance. This level of management. So they are also part of management. That's what you must understand. This first line and second line are also part of management. 1 and 2 are they are the management, but the management can be divided into two: first line and second line. First line owns the risk, principal owners of risk. Second line provides support quality assurance, risk management, health and safety, what else? Risk department. They support. So what do they do? This level of management provides guidance on performance and ERM requirements, evaluates adherence to standards, and challenges the first line to take prudent. So when the first line try to do something, these are the guys who question it. The risk officer will give his input into various decisions. They question. Can you see challenges the first line? Evaluates adherence to standards. So the chief risk officer might introduce standards, and this guy might see whether the company is actually following those standards. Provides guidance. So second line provides guidance, checks, evaluates adherence to standards, and challenges the first line. It's a support function. Third line is what? Third line is assurance. No, third line is not part of management. Very clearly, that you have to understand. Third line is internal auditing. The internal, what is the distinguishing or differentiating feature of the third line from the first line and second line? It's the independence. Third line is independent. The internal auditor audits ERM, identifies issues and improvements, and informs the board and the executives of matters needing resolution. So the third line, you and I, we form the third line. Our job is we are independent because we report to the audit committee and the board. We check to see whether the management is properly identifying risks, whether they are following a proper ERM methodology. We suggest improvements to the risk management processes. We don't go to identify risk. We look at see whether they have identified risk properly and they follow proper procedure. Has the management, for example, evaluated risks properly in terms of, or not evaluated, risk assessments, assessed risks in terms of impact likelihood properly? Are the risk treatments okay? Are there risks with the management? So that is our role. And we inform the board and executives management through our reports. Right? Third line is independent. First line and second line. First line principal owners of risk. Second line supporting function. Second line, they support the challenge of first line. So these are the ERM components. The COSO ERM framework consists of 5 interrelated components. So this they might ask you at the exam. What are the components? You have the components at the bottom. Governance and culture. Then strategy and objective setting. Then performance. Review and revision. Information communication and reporting. The COSO ERM framework consists of 5 interrelated components. What are those? MCQ question. GC, governance culture. Strategy and objective setting. Can't manage risks if you don't set a strategy and if you don't set objectives. No? Without knowing what the KPIs, KRIs are, how can you manage? You can't manage something that you don't measure. No? If a company is just performing without a strategy, without KPI, then that's a huge risk issue. Let's have quantitative targets. Performance review and revision, information communication and reporting. This is important on risk, like in internal audits. Information communication and reporting is very, very important. The supporting aspect components. So there are 2 supporting aspect components and common processes. So just know that. So these 5 elements or 5, sorry, they are not elements. They are 5 components. Have 2 supporting aspects, 1 and 5. Governance and culture supports, information communication report supports, and then common process, strategy setting, performance tracking and reviewing and revision. So what are these? We'll now go through this. So governance and culture, there are 2, 3, 4 slides. My God, 5 slides on governance and culture. And there are few slides of strategy and objective setting. Can you see? Performance, 3 slides, 4, 5. What are slides on performance? Then review and revision, 1 slide. And then information communication and reporting, another few slides. So now we are going to learn about the components of the ERM framework. What specific framework? The COSO framework. Right, there are supporting and common processes, supporting a GC, ICR, common strategy setting, objective setting, performance review and revision. So let's now go into the first one. Because and these are all MCQ based, so there's nothing to write. But there can be MCQs from governance and culture. Governance sets the tone, correct? And establishes responsibilities for ER. So if you are doing now, I will just look at it from an audit perspective. So now you have to audit the governance and culture component. So what is the tone at the top when it comes to risk management? Is there a document establishing the responsibilities for ERM among the board, management, and the 3 lines of defense, CRO? I can remember developing a ERM framework for a company, and I had to define the role of the board as a whole, the role of the audit committee or the risk committee, the role of management in terms of the CEO and the heads of department, the role of the CRO, and the role of the risk department, and everyone's role, all employees. Those are the roles which I had to define. So this defining of their roles is very important. It must be documented so that can hold them accountable if there is an issue. So governance is all about setting the tone at the top. That is the vision, mission. Can you remember? We talked about mission, vision, core values. It's governance. That has an impact on the risk culture, isn't it? Doesn't it? And an ERM policy specifying the roles. Culture relates to the behaviors. Yeah, behavior, attitude, values, overall understanding about risk held by personnel. Sometimes you have to speak to people and ask, what is risk? What is your role in risk? What are your responsibilities in terms of risk? What is your understanding about risk? 5 principles relate to governance and culture. 5 principles. So what are those 5 principles? Number 1, the board exercises risk oversight. If the board does not exercise, if the board does not discharge its governance or risk management role and oversee, if the board does not provide risk oversight of culture, capabilities, and practices, then that will have a huge impact on the risk management of the company. Right. So when you talk about the governance and culture, there has to be a board, there has to be a risk committee, there has to be an audit committee. The board has to play a risk oversight role. That is number 1. Number 2, the organization establishes operating structure. There has to be a structure, no organizational structure. No. There is no organization, not about risk management structure. It has to have a proper organization. Any organization must have a structure. If it does not have proper reporting lines, a proper structure, proper departments, then it's a big problem. Organization defines the desired culture. There must be a definition of culture, in the ERM policy. What are we trying? What sort of culture should we have? That definition must be there. Organization demonstrates commitment to core values. These are important. Now, number 3, defining the risk culture, defining the core values, and the management actually from time to time displaying and committing, showing commitment to core values is very important. And the 5th one is about getting the recruiting good capable staff, developing staff, retaining staff. That is very, very important. Right? So what are the 5 principles related to governance and culture? Number 1, the board must discharge its risk oversight duties. Number 2, the organization must have a proper organizational structure, proper operating structures. Number 3, the organization must define a culture, desired culture. Number 4, the directors, the senior management must show commitment to the core values. They have honesty and this and that, but they are not honest or dishonest. They don't talk about these core values. There's no point. Number 5, they must be committed to getting competent people, not only attracting, recruiting competent people, but training competent people and retaining them. All 3 are important. If those 3 aspects fail, 5 aspects fail, then you can't govern. What are you talking about? You can't govern risk. Board does not play its role. You have stupid people in the organization, incompetent fellows. The board and senior management is not committed to its values. The senior management does not articulate its desired risk culture. And the organization does not have a proper structure in place. If these 5 are not there, what's there to talk about? No point having a fantastic software to manage risks, or no point having all that if these. The full board ordinarily is responsible for risk oversight, the full board. However, the board may delegate this task to a risk committee. In banks, you call it the Integrated Risk Management Committee. Sometimes the audit committee plays that role in smaller companies. Management generally has a day-to-day responsibility for managing performance and risks taken to achieve strategy. So day-to-day, if you see that word, it's management. Who is responsible for risk management? It's management. The board's oversight role may include, but is not limited to, reviewing and challenging decisions. So the management prepares the strategy, the management has its risk appetite statement, they make decisions, but the board's role is to challenge those. Now, when the management comes to the board, must challenge, ask questions. Not stupid questions, but provide that independent thinking, independent element. Approving management compensation. Approving management compensation. Participating in stakeholder relations. Management compensation, why they are saying that is that's very important to the remuneration committee and all. They must be properly compensated, but compensated in a way also where they're not compensated for taking big risks. The variable fixed components must be proper, Participating in stakeholder relations. That is, there are different stakeholders, shareholders, employees, suppliers, regulators. So board needs to maintain proper relationships with the regulator, with the various stakeholders. So you review, board reviews decisions, challenges decisions, looking at compensation, approving compensation, especially for the director level and key management personnel, and also maintaining proper stakeholder relations, stakeholder engagement, they call it. Risk oversight is most effective when the board has the necessary skills, experience, and business knowledge. Obviously, the board must have people with the required skills, experience, and business knowledge. Number is independent. So independent directors have a what you call a more important governance role than non-independent directors. Determines whether ERM capabilities and practices enhance value, that is their oversight, Understands the organizational biases, tendencies for excessive risk avoidance or risk taking. Influence in decision making and challenges management to minimize them. So what they're saying is the board must be have people with the required skills, experience. Board directors, there must be a few independent directors. Then the directors must also understand the various biases in the organization, more towards risk taking, risk aggressive, or risk avoidance. And whenever decisions are made by the management, challenge it, not for the sake of challenging it, but intelligently challenge them and get them to think. But at the end of the day, the board is responsible. No? Board is responsible, so they have the power to veto any management decision. Then organization. So in the MCQ, what would happen is they may talk about a board and the board's role. So then that will be related to governance and culture. They may talk about having independent directors. They may talk about having a very skilled or unskilled board. And they might ask you, which component does this have an impact? So then you have to say, if the board is not effective, it will have an impact on the governance and culture component. Then if you look at the second principle under GC, it's organization establishes operating structures. They describe how the entity is organized and carried out. So how the organization is divided into various departments, functions, units, who is reporting to whom, what they are heading, and all that reporting lines. They are generally aligned with the entity's legal structure and management structure. The legal structure determines how the entity operates. Okay, so legal structure is like, parent, subsidiary, and all that. Management structure is about the organization within the entity, how the roles, responsibilities, and all that. Because sometimes they could have, for example, procurement and finance going together. May have or procurement inventory going together where there is a lack of segregation of duties. So these are things that you all have to look at. The way it's, when you audit various departments, the structure, who is reporting to whom, and see whether the department is sufficiently, whether they are carrying out any task which leads to a lack of segregation of duties. I can remember recently also, procurement is also handled by the inventory people, which is not right. Small issues, Factors to consider when establishing and evaluating operating structures include the entity strategy, business objectives, including related risk, nature, size, geographic distribution. So let's go through 1 to 5, Roman. So obviously, when you are looking at the operating structure of the company, the strategy, business objectives, so you have to look at that. Sometimes we just take the organizational structure and try to evaluate. No, get an understanding about the strategy of the organization, their KPIs, get an idea about the geographic locations that they are working in. If they have a lot of operations in Kandy, maybe you have to have a department in Kandy and, have a proper structure there. Then how the responsibilities are, accountabilities, how the authorities are delegated. Some people may have more responsibilities than others. More people reporting to one person than you can manage. Types of reporting lines, communication channels, reporting requirements. So it's interesting now when you're looking at an organizational structure at a department level or at a macro level, looking at all the departments, you have to consider read the strategic plan, get an idea about the KPIs, KRIs, the product services the organization produces, supplies, the size, the geographic distribution of the organization. And for each level, what are their responsibilities, accountabilities, how the authorities delegated. The reporting lines, all that, and the reporting requirements. All this will have an impact on the strategy, on the organization operating structure. The organization, third one, they are saying the organization must define the desired culture. The board and management are responsible for defining culture. They must communicate, articulate. The culture is shaped by internal and external factors. Internal, the level of judgment and autonomy allowed to personnel. Yeah. Is everything delegated or centralized or decentralized? Standards, rules, policies and procedures, rewards, compensation. The way the people are rewarded will tell whether they are risk averse or risk taking. Policies and procedures will also be a factor that controls the culture. If a company has no policies, procedures, then it will be a very risk-taking culture. And the amount of responsibilities that are delegated down the line, delegated authorities. If you take payments, is it delegated or is every payment authorized by the CFO or a regional level, they can approve up to 100,000. Above that goes to the national manager. Above that, there are different levels. External factors, legal requirements, stakeholder expectations, customers, investors, and all that. So this is basic theory, I suppose. The organization's definition of culture determines its placement on the culture spectrum. Yeah, is it risk neutral? Is it risk averse? Is it risk aggressive? So that also can be an MCQ where they talk about, the importance of defining culture. I mean, you can't write it down and say this is our culture, but the ERM policy, there has to be a paragraph on culture. About the importance of having and what affects this culture. Culture meaning what? When you say culture, what does that mean? Culture related to behavior, values, and overall understanding about risk. So the ERM policy will have to talk about this. And then there are internal and external factors which affect culture that you have to know. And then if a company is taking a lot of risks, that company would be risk aggressive. If the company is not taking risks, that company would be risk averse. But you have to be somewhere in the middle. Next one. The organization demonstrates commitment to core values. That's important. The organization's core values should be reflected in all its actions and decisions. Whenever the way the management behaves, the way the management takes decisions, they must be in alignment with your core values of integrity, teamwork, whatever the values that you have. The tone of the organization is the manner in which core values are communicated, the tone at the top. If the CEO says, let's take risks and all that, to hell with the internal control, then that tone is wrong. CEO has to come out and say, these are core values. We have to be careful. Controls are important. We need to manage them. Internal audit observations must be taken seriously. Recommendations must be implemented. There cannot be delays in implementing rectification action. All that. So the tone must be proper. So the tone is set by the directors. If you go to an audit committee meeting, the audit committee chairman basically sets the tone. Chairman will be a little strict. It sets the tone for the entire, all the people. If it's a very relaxed chairman who does not take observations very seriously, then that has a big impact on the organization. Right? When risk-aware culture and tone are aligned, stakeholders have confidence in the organization abide. So there must be a risk-aware culture. Risk-aware culture is a culture where people are aware of the risks that their actions create. Some people don't know much about risk. They don't know how to define risk. They don't know the kind of, because risk is created by employees. So they must be aware of the different types of risks they create. Must be aware of that. Why do they perform controls? Because they perform controls to mitigate a risk. They must be aware of it. They must be aware of their risk role in risk management. So commitment to core values must be demonstrated by whom? By the board, by the management, and it's about setting the tone and ensuring that the actions, decisions are in alignment with the values. It is very, very important. The organization attracts, develops, and remains is also important. Management is responsible for defining the human capital necessary to achieve strategy and objectives. You need to have the right people at the right place. About having proper job specifications. The human resources function must have proper recruitment policies, training policies, performance evaluation policies, compensation policies, mentor-mentee schemes, so employee engagement policies. Contingency plans should be dealt to prepare for succession plans. So all that is important. So here we are talking in a way. Number 4 is about the intangibles, commitment. Number 5 is about the human resources. This is also intangible, culture. This is about the structure, the governance structure. And this is about oversight. So first one is about oversight. Second one is about structure. If you can you see culture, capabilities, and practices? Culture, capabilities, and practices. The board, risk oversight, culture, capabilities, operating structure. Here is about structures. It's about culture. Core values also about culture. And then attracts, develops is about having the right people, capabilities. Now, the first principle was governance and culture. Can you see? There were 5 components, not principles. Again, I made a mistake. It's components. The first component, governance and culture, had 5. There are 5 components. And the important word here is that they are all interrelated. One flows from the other. And then the governance and culture component had 5 principles. 5 principles. You have 5 principles related to governance and culture. Now, after governance and culture, you have strategy and objective setting. If you are doing an ERM audit, now you have to look at this. Does the ERM policy cover properly the roles of the board? You have to go through their minutes to see whether in terms of risk management with the risk registers and all that, risk appetite statements are available. So risk documentation. Then you have to look at the structures. Then you have to look at the desired culture definitions. Then you have to look at the tone at the top. Then you have to look at the HR policies, capability. All these have an impact, not only on risk management, but on controls as well. If you look at the COSO framework also, you need to have competent people. Because in the COSO framework, governance and culture, in the course of internal control framework, it's about the control environment. All these have an impact on the control environment. So all these 5 principles on the governance and culture have an impact on the risk control environment. So next thing is strategy and objective setting. So here they say you need to have proper strategy and objective setting, and what is covered under that. Strategy must support the organization's vision, mission, and core values. So we have to read the strategy now. They must be in alignment with the mission, vision, and core value. The integration of ERM with strategy setting helps to understand the risk profile related to strategy. So when you talk about ERM, you look at the governance culture aspects, which is like the environment. Then they say ERM must be embedded into strategy setting. When you prepare strategy, formulate strategy, that's a better word. Risk has to be looked at. What are the risks? Right. So integration of ERM is strategy setting, objective setting. You can't be just formulating or developing strategy and setting KPIs without even looking at what the risk aspects of it. Risk must be embedded into strategy setting and objective setting. Then only you have the proper risk profile. 4 principles related to this. So this part has 4 principles. Let's look at those 4 principles. The organization analyzes the business context. Business context pertains to relationships, events, trends, and other factors that influence the organization. So it's about the environmental scanning, pestle scanning, political, environmental, social, technological, then legal, environment, but other things that are happening outside, what other things that are happening inside, The internal environment consists of capital, people, processes, technology. External environment consists of social, technology, all that. So what they are saying here is, if you want to have good ERM in the strategy setting aspects where ERM should be embedded, you have to look at the external and things that are happening in the external and internal environment. That's true. Otherwise, you don't know what the risks are, because there can be a new policy by the TRC about some telecommunication something, or some tax policy coming out from the regulator, Inland Revenue Department, which will have an impact on your business. Those are risk events, Business context may be dynamic, changing, complex, complicated, and unpredictable. Now we are mainly in the unpredictable category. The organization defines risk appetite, the amount of risk it's willing to accept in the pursuit of value that we studied. The organization considers its mission, vision, culture, prior strategies, and risk capacity. The maximum risk it can do to set its risk appetite, correct? So when an organization wants to set its risk appetite, what are the things that they need to consider? The vision, mission, culture, prior strategies, and the risk capacity. In setting risk appetite, the optimal balance of opportunity and risk is sought. So you have to take risks to get the proper reward. So it has to be a balance, proper balance. Risk appetite is rarely set above risk capacity. The upper range of is generally the risk capacity. The risk appetite may be expressed qualitatively. The risk appetite may be expressed qualitatively, low, moderate, high, or quantitatively in financial. So quantitative means there is a figure, number, which is low, medium, high, and it's qualitative. But it should reflect how risk assessment results are expressed. The board approves of risk appetite and management communicates it throughout the organization. So this part is about the risk appetite statement. So go and have a look. Go to the internet and type bank risk appetite statement, insurance risk appetite statement, and see what risk appetite statements look like. Right? So risk appetite may be now, if you are giving loans, how much of it should be vehicle, how much should it be land? So land might be 10% of the credit portfolio is land. You must not exceed 10%. You have to keep it below 10. Education loans must be kept to 5%. So like that, you can have different risk appetite levels. It can be from the type of the type of loan, the mortgage, type of mortgage. It can be to industries. If it's hotel sector, leisure sector, loans, when we are giving loans, it will always be less than 10% of the entire base. We must not exceed. If something happens to that industry, then there is a risk. Like that, you have to set risk appetites. NPA, non-performing advances. Region-wise, you can set appetites. Now I'm just looking at a bank credit portfolio that way. So appetites must be set. If you're doing leasing, pawning, you might tell gold loans. Pawning will always be less than 30% of the entire advanced portfolio. You must never exceed 30%. So if the gold prices go, otherwise massive impact. But up to 30% we can go. Individual loans to people must not exceed a certain percentage. Loans to group companies must not exceed a certain percentage. So similarly, we have to be careful. The organization evaluates alternative strategies and their effects on the risk profile. So there will be different strategies, no? SWOT analysis. The organization must evaluate the strategy's alignment. So it's about strategy selection, which best aligns with the mission, vision, values, risk appetite, implications of those chosen strategies. Strategy should be changed if it fails to create, realize, or preserve value. It's all about creation of value, realizing of value, preserving of value. No? The organization establishes business objectives. So this first one, right? Under this, under strategy and objective setting, just give me a second. This first one, when you are setting strategy and objectives, KPIs, the first important thing from an ERM perspective is to analyze the context. That is, look at the external factors, internal factors, and how and what are the risks it poses. So, analysis of business context and its effect on risk profile. That is important in strategy and objectives. The second one, they said this, the organization must define a risk appetite statement. This is very, very important. I gave you an example about a credit portfolio. So you're setting strategy here, you're setting objectives. First thing, scan your business environment, external and internal, because that will have an impact on your risk profile. Second one, you must develop a risk appetite statement. You must develop a risk appetite statement. Third one, when you are trying to select which strategy to take, obviously you'll have several strategies. And those strategies will have differing impacts on the risk profile. Right? So this is about evaluating strategies. First one was about scanning the external and internal environment and seeing how it affects the risks. Second one was about defining a risk appetite statement, because once you define appetite statement only, you can now select a strategy, because strategy that you select must be within the risk appetite. No? So risk appetite statement is defined first. This is the overall, the amount of risk the company is willing to accept in the pursuit of value. Then you look at, now you have a risk appetite statement, then you'll have the different strategies. Strategy A, expand to Monoragal and Vaunia, B, expand to Kandy, 3, expand to Badulla. Then you have the different strategies. Then you select, okay, what is the one best that fits our mission, vision, core values, and the risk appetite. What is the best? And the implications of those strategies. The fourth one is about, now, once the strategy is decided, then you have to set objectives, KPIs, and these KPIs we all know must be SMART, specific, measurable, observable, obtainable. Obtainable means you must be able to achieve those. So objectives must be set, and whenever you set a KPI, it must be measurable, specific. Measurable means quantitative to the greatest extent possible. Observable, you must be able to observe it. Obtainable means it must be reasonable. You should be achievable. Then comes performance. So now you have scanned the environment. You have scanned the environment. You have looked at the risks. Then you have set a risk appetite. Then you have looked at different strategies and how that affects on the risk profile. And then they tell you, select a strategy which is in alignment with vision, mission, core values, and risk appetite. And look at the implication. And then they say set objectives. But when you're setting objectives, make sure that they are specific, they are achievable, obtainable, they are observable and measurable. Right? Performance measures, targets, and tolerances are established to evaluate the achievement of objectives. So you have to basically set KPIs. And when you set KPIs, they say some can be financial, some can be operational excellence, some can be related to financial, operational excellence, or some can be related to compliance objectives. Now, in the course of The internal control framework, we said objectives are operational, reporting, and compliance. No? Can you remember? Operational, reporting, and compliance. So reporting would be financial, no, in a sense. Operational is this and compliance. So there are a lot of overlapping areas, no, between the internal control COSO framework and the ERM COSO framework. So next comes, so now we have looked at the environment, we have set a risk appetite, then we have looked at various strategies and alternatives and selected one which is best alignment with the vision, mission, and core values. Then we have set objectives. Objectives have to have certain features like this. And they say these objectives can be financial, operational, or compliance related. And then we have the performance aspects. Performance aspects. So this is basically how our organization should be run. No? This tells you these are all, if you look at all these areas, these are all part of an organization, really, no? Governance, strategy setting, performance review. So, but now here they are saying how to embed risk management into governance and culture, how to embed risk management into strategy and objective. Now here, how to embed risk management into governance, about the board playing an oversight role, looking at the structure, having a proper structure, defining a risk culture, aligning, communicating core values, attracting right people. Then how do you set risk management into strategy and objective setting phase? Do a proper scanning of the internal and external environment. Set a risk appetite statement. When you're setting a strategy, set a risk appetite statement. When you're looking at strategy, alternative strategies, look at the impact effects on the risk profile. When you're setting KPIs, make sure they are measurable, observable, obtainable. Otherwise, you can't monitor risk. No. Now comes performance, and how do we embed risk management into performance? So after performance, what do we have? After performance, we have review, revision. So let's look at performance. So can you just go through this slide, please? The performance also, there are, my gosh, several slides. Just go through this for a minute. I'll just have a sip of water and come. So if you are doing a ERM audit, you can see the areas that you have to cover. No? I mean, just look at this. If you're doing an ERM audit, you have to divide your scope into these 5 areas. No? Governance and culture audit, strategy and objective setting audit, performance audit, review, revision audit, information communication reporting. So if you are doing a ERM audit on the governance and culture aspect, you have to see, does the board play its risk oversight role properly? What are the documents you have to check for this? Who are the people you have to speak to? Does the company have a proper operating structure? But that has a huge impact on the way risks. Has the company defined its risk culture in the ERM policy? Does the company communicate, how does the company show its commitment? You can ask the board, you can ask the management, you can look at the various meetings, and through your interactions. Does the company have the proper policies and all that is in place to attract, develop, and retain people? So you have to audit the governance culture. Then you go to the objective and talk to the people about how they prepare their strategy development. Look at their risk appetite statements. see whether they part of strategy, they scan the environment. Look at their KPIs, are they measurable, observable, and do they do SWOT analysis and all those things. And then you come to performance. So performance is what now? Performance relates to ERM practices that support the organization's decisions in pursuit of value. So these are the practices, right? Those practices consider identifying, assessing, prioritizing, responding, and developing portfolio view of risks. Now look at this. Now this is the area, right? This is the area where you identify risks. Processes related to practices related to identifying risks, practices related to assessing risks, evaluating risks, putting in place risk treatments. All that is covered under this. The organization, so 5 principles relate to performance, 5 again. The organization identifies risks that affect the performance of strategy and business. So how does it identify risks? Now you have to audit the risk methodology. That is the thing here. Risk identification, assessment, evaluation, treatment, review, and methodology. Now we are auditing the methodology as an auditor. The organization identifies risks that affect the performance of strategy and business objectives. That is their job. The organization should identify risks that disrupt operations and affect the reasonable expectations. So how does the management now identify risks? Here you are looking at risk assessments, risk registers, updating of the risk appetite statements, and all that jargon. New emerging changing risks are identified. Examples are risks resulting from changes in objectives in business context. You can figure it out, no? Inflation, interest rate, exchange rate, human resources risks companies face nowadays due to changes in the environment, economic climate, political climate, technological climate, regulatory climate. The organization also identifies opportunity. These actions or potential actions that create, so there are changes, there are opportunities also. Risk identification methods. How do you identify risks? Day-to-day activities, right? From customer complaints that could tell you certain risk budgeting, business planning, simple questionnaires to staff, workshops where you have self-assessment workshops where you get the people together and ask them, okay, what are the risks that you all face? By interviewing people one-to-one or in groups, data tracking, databases, data mining, and all that. The risk inventory consists of all risks that could affect the entity. All risks that could affect the entity, I put into a risk inventory. Risk and opportunity identification should be comprehensive. So this first phase is all about identifying risks, how the management identifies risks. Do they identify it through just, what are the processes, the practices through which they identify risks? Is it through data analytics, data mining of databases, interviewing people, interviewing outsiders, insiders, workshop method, getting staff to fill in questionnaires, or through their day-to-day activities? Planning, budgeting, overseeing, looking at customer complaints. So there are different methods. And you're now as a internal auditor, I'm looking at it from an internal audit perspective. You have to see how they do this. As I told you before, I can remember implementing an ERM framework, and the first question was, now we may have to carry out some of these tasks, no? First one, of course, is already done through questionnaire, workshops, interviews as to new risks. And then we have to carry out scanning of the environment. No? That is very, very important. Internal and environmental scanning, and to do that, who is going to do that in an organization and track? So for that, there must be processes in place to have a proper database of information upon which you could use to identify risks. That you can't just 2 or 3 people sit in a room and think of all the risks. No? You want to think about what risks are out there. They need to collect information which is fairly accurate and timely, not outdated. So then there are these various capital trusts and various places which prepare research reports. Go through all of that. Performance relates to ERM practices. That's about this video. Sorry. The organizer, this is about identifying risks. Then you come to the assessing the severity of risks. Is the risk severe? So now it's about assessment of the risk. It's about understanding the causes of the risk. Why is the risk? What causes this risk to take place? And looking at the what you call impact and likelihood. Impact is the effect. Can be positive or negative. Likelihood is the probability. You have to assess. When they talk about risk assessment, that's what they mean. Underlying causes of the risk, impact of the risk, likelihood of the risk. Risk is assessed at multiple levels. Yeah, some risks are at divisional level, some risks are at more strategy level, strategic risk, operational risks, reporting risks, compliance risk at different levels you can have. So this page, this slide 36 is on assessing the severity of risk. How does the management do that? Do they have proper methodology to do it? So all that will be defined in the ERM policy, how to assess the severity of the risk. Then we go on to performance, another one, prioritization of risks. Once you assess, you have to prioritize. Impact likelihood, so the red ones will be high priority, orange, dark orange will be medium, then the next one will be low and very low, green will be very low. Risk prioritization enables the organization to optimize the allocation. So you have to prioritize risk and allocate your resources to manage those high risks, because resources are not infinite. They are scarce, and you have to manage it. In addition to severity, the following factors are considered when prioritizing risks. Agreed upon risk appetite. Yeah, look at the risk appetite, the importance of the affected business objective. Yeah, so that all that needs to be considered. Yeah. So prioritize it, and then so first one was identifying. Second one was assess severity of risk. Third one was about prioritizing risks. Yeah, so this is all part of the third one. Agreed upon criteria used to evaluate the characteristics of risk to determine the individual's capacity to respond appropriately. So what they're saying is it a complex risk? Is it velocity? Is the speed at which the risk affects the entity? Some risks happen, but it takes time for your entity to be affected by it. Some risks, events, when they happen, you're affected immediately. Now, for example, in banks, when the central bank raised interest rates, immediately they had to increase the fixed deposit rate. Other people will take deposits and take it to other banks or finance companies which offer a higher rate. So velocity was very high there. Persistence, how long the risk affects the entity. Some risks effect will be short term, some will be long term. They're able to adapt and the ability to recover. So these are some of the criteria when you are talking about risk events. Look at the complexity, velocity, persistence, adaptability, recovery, and what this means could be tested in the form of an MCQ. What does complexity mean? Nature and scope of a risk. Is it a kind of a individual risk which does not affect others, or is it kind of an interdependent risk where this risk affects others and causes other risks? Velocity is the speed at which, when the risk event occurs, the speed at which within 5 minutes you're affected, or within 5 days or 5 hours, how quickly does it take once the event occurs for your entity to be impacted? Persistence is how long is the effect, that risk. Adaptability, how can the organization adapt and recover? Higher priority also is assigned to risks that approach or exceed risk appetite. Yeah, if it exceeds risk appetite, obviously, those risks have to be addressed, because you have to bring the risk within the risk appetite. cause performance level to approach the outer limits of tolerance. Yes, that is that when it's up to 100 to 110. Because you have to be careful. Affect the entire entity or at the entity level. So strategic risks. Some risks at operational level or business unit level. Some affect the entity at a enterprise-wide level. So those entity risks which affect the entire entity, strategic risks, are more important. Questions of chapter 1 and 2 are not accessible now. Yeah, so if it's not accessible, I will speak to them and tell them to make it accessible. Then approach or exceed risk appetite. Yeah, those risks which exceed the appetite are very closer to the appetite, to the low upper range. Those have to be looked at. Those have to be prioritized. Then cause performance levels to approach the outer limits of tolerance. Yeah. So this can be, they can form an MCQ on this. When you're trying to prioritize it, the risks which approach or exceed the risk appetite, risks which are closer to the risk tolerance levels, outer limits of the tolerance levels, risks which affect the entire entity rather than a particular entity division. Those have to be prioritized as high risk. Then these are the risk responses. So selecting risk treatment or risk response is also part of performance. So performance, we looked at identification, assessing the risk severity. Then we looked at, now we are looking at responses. So what are the responses that are there? These are all MCQs. I can ask you. Other 5 categories, no? Yeah, accept. No action is taken. You just accept. Some risks are there. You just accept as it is. You decide there's nothing to do. No need to manage. You can accept it is well within the risk appetite. Acceptance. Second one is avoid. Some risks, they say, okay, if you launch this product, you are exposed to a risk. So you wait without launching the product. Finish, you avoid the entire thing. Action is taken to remove the risk. Pursuit, action is taken to accept increased risk to improve performance without exceeding. So pursuit means it's a kind of acceptance, no? Yeah, but you accept it, but you don't want to exceed the tolerances. Reduction, mitigation, that's what we mostly do. We take risk treatments to reduce the severity of the risk. It is about the inherent risk, where you do something to make the inherent risk, and then what is remaining after the control, the residual risk within the risk appetite. Reduction, risk mitigation, controls, policies, controls. Sharing is like giving it to some other party. It could be to insurance or outsourcing, or you can subcontract it or something like that, right? Or a JV, through a JV, sharing of risks. So you don't know. So you accept, do nothing. Avoid. Pursuit, action is taken to accept increased risk to improve performance without exceeding, so you pursue the risk. But you have to improve the performance also. Reduction is about what we normally do. And share to insurers, joint venture, through joint ventures, JVs, hedging, outsourcing, subcontracting, right? So you don't know this. You can be asked for the definition in an MCQ. Then comes organization identifies and selects risk response. The following are the factors considered in selecting and implementing risk response. They should be chosen for adapt to the business context. So whatever risk response, whatever control that you put to address the risk, you must consider your business context, the practicality. The cost benefit also must be considered. I mean, the cost must not exceed the benefit, no? The cost of implementing the control or taking action to mitigate the risk should not exceed the benefit that you get of achieving the objective. They should further compliance They should further compliance with obligations. Yes, compliance is important. They should bring risk within risk appetite, obviously, no? Everything must be brought within risk appetite and result in performance outcomes within tolerances. Risk response should reflect risk severity. So what are the things that you need to take into account when you are implementing risk responses? One is you have to take into account the severity of the risk. Second thing, look at the risk appetite, risk tolerance, first benefit, business context, and achievement of expectation. Right? Achievement of expectations, compliance with standards and all that. Control of activities are designed and implemented to ensure responses are carried out. So it's through controls, no? Controls and controls. The organized, number 5. Number 5. The organization develops and evaluates its portfolio view of risk. The culmination of risk identification, assessment, prioritization, and response is the full portfolio view of risk. Yeah. The following 4 risk views have different levels of risk integration. Risk review. Risk view. Risks are identified and assessed. Emphasis is on the event, not the business objective. Risk category view. Limited integration. Identify and assess risks are categorized based on operating structures. Risk profile view. Risks are linked to the business objective they affect, and portfolio, full integration. This composite view of risk relates to entity-wide strategy. So these are ways of looking at your risks. So I think the best would be to have a kind of a portfolio view of the risks. Risk profile view. Yeah, risks are identified and they're linked to objectives. The risk integration view, all the risks relates to the entity-wide strategy, which is the best one. Sometimes what happens is we have operational level risks, reporting risks, compliances, but none of them are linked to the strategic risks, you know. The best is to ensure that they are all aligned. Otherwise, they are process level risk, operational level risk. We don't know how, even if we do an audit, we don't know how these low-level risks actually affect the high-level risks. So maximum integration happens at portfolio. You take a portfolio view, entity-wide strategy, and best is to start from the top and come down. Risk profile view, then you have risk category view and risk view, minimal integration. Yeah, so now when you just identify risks and they are not related to the entity, at the strategic risk level, you just identify risk and assess them. They are not linked to the objective, business objective. They are not linked to strategic objectives. Risk category view is next one, where you categorized based on operating structures. Maybe, you know, you have a departmental level, you kind of have HR risks, finance risks, supply chain risks. So they are there, but it's the departmental level, you know, based on operating structures. Then risk profile. So risk view, risk category view, risk profile view. They are linked. Maybe they are linked to business objectives. Risks are linked to the business objectives they affect. For example, an objective of increased sales may depend on objective to introduce a new product line. So here in the risk profile view, you have a link between the risk that you identify and the business objective. So there is some integration there. Then in the last one, portfolio view, this composite view of risk relates to entity-wide strategy. So it's at a very high level. Full. So business objectives, then above business objectives, you have strategic objectives, no? The main ones. They are linked to the risk strategic objective strategy here. At the top level, great emphasis is on the strategic. Thus, the responsibility for business objectives and specific risk cascades through the entity. So this is something that you need to think of, because as internal auditors, we mainly look at operational level risks. But whenever we audit, we must see how those operational or process level risks. Because sometimes when we give a finding, we say, is this a financial risk? Is this operational risk? Is this a strategic risk? Is this a compliance risk? So strategic risks are the most important ones. Using a portfolio view of risk management determines whether the entity's residual risk profile inclusive of risk aligns with overall risk appetite. Yes. The residual risk profile must be within the risk appetite. Residual risk meaning you have inherent risks, you apply the risk responses, then what is left is the residual risk. The organization develops and evaluates its portfolio view of risks. Qualitative and quantitative methods. Quantitative are more statistical. Evaluate how changes in risk may affect the portfolio view of risks. So this is little to stress testing, scenario analysis, benchmarking. Review and revision. The fourth principle. No? The organization reviews and revises its current ERM capabilities and practices based on changes in strategy. So review and revision, I think, is all about changing your methodology, as changes take place. The organization reviews and revises its current ERM capabilities and practices. So whatever ERM methodology that you use, right, your governance and culture or whatever the practices may have to be changed based on your strategy and business objectives. I mean, if your strategy is changing, the organization identifies and assesses changes that may substantially affect strategy and business objectives. Changes in organization's business context, culture, most likely to substantially affect the strategy. So what they're saying is there are changes which take place in the internal external environment which will impact on the strategy and business objectives of the organization. The organization now, when things happen outside or inside, which has an impact on the strategy and the business objectives of the company, then you have to look at your current DRM capabilities and practices. Even that there are now changes to strategy and business objectives. The organization reviews entity performance results and considers risk. Performance results that deviate from target performance or tolerance may indicate unidentified. So what they're saying is if you set let's say a sales target of 100 million and achieve 70, now there's a variance of 30, no? So now you have to see why was that? Was it due to an unidentified risk? Or was it due to not properly assessing the risk? Or is it a new risk that came about? Unidentified risk means the risk was there, but you failed to identify it. Improper assessment means the impact likelihood, underlying causes, you haven't properly assessed it. Or some new risk which has come about, which was not there earlier. Opportunities to accept more risk, or should you accept a risk? Or should you change that 100 million target to something else? So you have to look at all that. The organization pursues improvement of ERM. Yeah, so the ERM methodologies may have to change. So that is review and revision. So review and revision, as you can see, is about, when performance results deviate. So this can be an MCQ question, no? So in the review and revision, first thing is the organization identifies and assesses. Let me show this. The organization identifies and assesses changes that may substantially affect the strategy and business objectives. Internal scanning, external scanning, changes are taking place externally, and that is now affecting the strategy and business objectives of the company. So when that affects strategy and business objectives due to changes in the external environment, that will mean that the performance, there'll be a gap between actual and budgetary performance. Then if there's a gap, why? You have to answer these, you have to look at these 5 areas, no? Why? And then based on that, you have to now look at the ERM practices. You have to look at the ERM practices. The organization must continually improve ERM at all levels, even if actual performance aligns with target performance or tolerance. Yeah, so even if you achieve the target, you might have to still do benchmarking more with other organizations or do something and improve your ERM practices. Information, communication, and reporting. The organization must capture, process, manage, and communicate timely and relevant information to identify risks. that could affect. Three principles apply. So this is about now capturing information which is relevant and timely, as I told you before, to identify risks that could affect the organization. It is about having a proper external and internal environmental scanning system and preparing proper databases based on which you can now make decisions and identify risks. Data, raw facts. So you need to collect data. Maybe you have so much of data in your databases, you may have to do data analytics, identify new trends, new things. Knowledge is transformed to structured data, unstructured data. So you have to look at all those things. Data management, information systems must be adaptable to change. So information communication and reporting is all about the organization must capture, process, and manage, right? Collect information and communicate timely and relevant information to identify risks that could affect strategy or business objectives. So just remember this little bit. It's about that's how organization needs to collect, maybe about the economy, economic reports, research reports, about the industry, industrial reports. If you're a bank, there are companies which produce central bank about the industry. Regulations, how can you capture that information? Then you look at all their databases, you do business data analytics and capture through data mining trends and various risks. Performance KPIs, KRIs will give you other things. And you might have to do, as earlier, workshops, questionnaires, interviews. Through that, you might capture certain other information. That must be there and report it to the people who need it, so that then you can, use it for identifying new risks. The organization uses communication channels to support ERM. Communications about risk management communicates the organization's strategy and business objectives to internal and external stakeholders. Communication between management and the board should include continuous discussions about risk appetite. So this is about ensuring that there are proper meetings at the board level, agendas, minutes you have to read, risk committee minutes, agendas you have to read, what are the reports that the board gets, what are the reports that the risk committee gets, what are the reports that the management considers in their risk committee and management level, what are the reports with the CRO compiles. Then you go through the minutes and see the risk appetite statement discussed at board level or at risk committee level. What are the policies and procedures that are there related to risk? What are the discussions that take place even at board meetings or at annual general meetings or EGMs? Are there any discussions? So this is about having the proper communication channels, reporting as an internal audit. Also, you have to see every department that you audit, you must see what are the KRIs for that department. What are the reports the head gets about the KRIs? How often does he get it? What are the reports that go from the department to the up the hierarchy or to the audit committee or to the board about the performance of that department, especially from a risk perspective? Are the KRIs sufficient? Should more KRIs be there? How is the frequency of reporting? Is it reported once a year when it should be done on a quarterly basis? All the departments covered. Right? The organization reports on risk culture and performance at multiple levels across the entity. Setting strategy, objectives, governance, and even if the organization has a strategy, is that communicated to staff? Do they know about the risk appetite statement? Sometimes the risk appetite statement, even the internal auditor doesn't get it. Such a confidential document. So all this must be there. It's about risk reporting. Assessing ERM. COSO ERM framework provides criteria for assessing whether the organization's ERM culture, capability, practices together effectively manage risk to strategy and business objectives. So It says the COSO ERM framework provides criteria for assessing whether the ERM culture, capabilities, and practices effectively manage risks. So get hold of these criteria. Framework provides criteria. So now these are the criteria basically which we have gone through. When the components, principles, and supporting controls are present and functioning, ERM is reasonably expected to manage risks effectively. So now we have gone through the components. We went through to some extent the principles. And they're talking about supporting controls. So the supporting controls we didn't go through. So ISO 31000 is also another principle-based approach to risk management. Its principles are the foundations for risk management. They also communicate the characteristics, value, and purpose of effective and efficient risk management. The purpose of risk management again is value creation and protection. In the early one, it was about value creation, preservation, and realization. These are the principles. So 31000 is a principle-based approach to risk management. So what are those principles? These are the principles. Integrated. It must be integrated. Risk management is integrated into all organizational activities. It's not just something which the risk management department performs. It is integrated to all activities. So this integration must be there, and that's an important feature. All organizational activities, risk management must be embedded. Structured and comprehensive. So there has to be a proper structure, governance structure to risk management. We talked about it, the different roles different people play in the organization. The need to have a risk methodology for identifying, evaluating, assessing, how to put in place, how to assess the impact and the likelihood. So there has to be an approach. There's a ERM framework must be there. So the ERM policy will create this ERM framework, how to assess, how to evaluate, how to manage, what are the risk reports that need to go to the senior management, all that. Customized. You can't just implement a framework as is. You have to always customize it to the organization. No? To that extent, it must be agile. That's why these frameworks are principle-based and not prescriptive, rule-based. Because it's principle-based, you can apply the principles, customize it to your specific companies based on the complexity and all that, size, complexity, and customize. Then inclusive. Appropriate involvement of stakeholders enables informed risk management. So all stakeholders must have an input to this. If there are employees, what are the risks coming from them? Suppliers, regulators. You must find out what all of these, the interests of all these people. Community might say we are interested in about the environmental risks, about your social risks. So then you have to include those. The shareholders might say we are mainly bothered about, the dividend and all that. So then that risk is there. Not paying dividends, or share price going down, or profits going below, it will affect the share price to earnings ratio. Dynamic. Dynamic means the model has to be dynamic. Right? Risk management foresees, recognizes, and reacts. To that extent, your risk, your model, your ERM framework must be dynamic. That means it must have components, scan the environment, collect information, quickly react. It cannot be, if the framework that you use, methodology that you use is one where you only do it once a year, then that's a problem, no? Must be dynamic to capture, foresee problems before it realizes and hits you. It must be based on best available information. That's very important. If you use outdated information as input to your risk management, identification, assessment, and all that, then that's a problem. So past data has to be considered, current and even futuristic data, trends, forecasts. Human cultural factors have to be taken into account. Because at the end of the day, it's all about humans. They have a huge impact on the culture of the organization. Continuous improvement. It's like the QAR, even for internal audits, we said you have to constantly improve the internal audit methodology and the processes in our organization. We have to do a quality assurance and improvement program must be there, which we learned about. And like that, the ERM risk management practices also must be continuously improved. A risk management framework is a set of components that includes leadership and commitment. Yeah, this is about governance and culture, no? The course of framework, this is about governance and culture. Integration, design, implementation, evaluation, and improvement of risk management. So improvement of risk management was also there, I can remember. 6 components are described as follows. So there are 6 components in the ISO framework. What are those 6 components? One is leadership and commitment. So in this, they say the board and senior management must demonstrate leadership and commitment by implementing the framework's components, adopting a policy that establishes a risk management plan. So that's the ERM policy for the company approved by the board. Committing resources to risk management, that's about the capability aspects, having competent people, recruiting competent people, and assigning accountability, authority, and responsibility at each level of the organization. Now that we covered here. Here, can you see board exercises oversight, of operating structures, desired culture, core values, develop, retain capable individuals. So all those are covered in this governance and culture part. Governance and culture part. So the governance and culture part in the course of framework is captured in the 31,000 framework under leadership and commitment. Yeah, leadership and commitment. If here you talk about having a policy, assigning accountability, authority, and responsibility. So this is for risk responsibility. Then committing resources to risk management. In the integration of the framework is second one. Leadership integration. Right? Integration is very important. It must be integrated into every aspect, into all facets of an organization, into its or business objectives, structure, governance, culture. Is a dynamic process. All personnel in the organization are responsible for managing this. So integration is about that. Every person has a responsibility for managing risks. Then design. The design of the framework involves what? There must be proper design, it seems. Framework must be properly designed. Understanding the organization and its context. That's about scanning the environment. Can you remember we said internal, external environment? Articulating commitment to risk management. That's about in governance and culture, we said. Tone at the top. Commitment to values. Assigning and communicating authorities and responsibilities. We already talked about that. Allocating resources, establishing communication and consultation. So there must be a proper design for all that. It's a little overlapping here and there. A risk management framework is a set of components that includes leadership for all that. The implementation. So here 1, 2, 3, design. 4th one was implementation. The implementation of the framework can be achieved by developing a plan, identifying decision-making process, modifying decision. Yeah, so evaluation of the framework's effectiveness involves measuring performance against expectations. Evaluation, improvement is about improving the framework itself. So in the earlier one, evaluation, if you go to this, yeah, improving the review and revision is about improving the ERM framework. Can you see? So review and revision in the course of framework basically captures evaluation and improvement. Right. The risk management process consists of the following elements: to improve understanding of risks and decisions made, communication, raise awareness and consultation, to obtain feedback and information requiring ongoing structured coordination. Yeah. So you can go through this at leisure. I mean, they won't test you too much into this, but these have overlapping processes. So they're talking about processes. Can you see risk identification process, risk analysis, evaluation? Risk analysis examines the nature, characteristics, and level of risk. It considers such factors as likelihood,
consequences, control effectiveness, and confidence level. Evaluation supports decision making by comparing the defined risk criteria with the outcome of the risk analysis and determine whether any action is required. So risk analysis is identifying the underlying causes of the risk, looking at the impact of the risk, likelihood of the risk. Risk evaluation is about, if you look at the difference between risk assessment and evaluation, there is a slight difference, right, between risk evaluation and assessment. So risk assessment basically looks at the causes of the underlying risk, and and you also look at the impact of the risk and the likelihood of the risk occurring. That is risk assessment. Now, risk evaluation is a little different. Can one of you tell me what risk evaluation is? It's a little different from risk evaluation. Some involves what sort of action are you going to take? Are you going to avoid it? Are you going to transfer it? That is done in risk evaluation. Right? What else is done in risk evaluation? Cost benefit. You look at the cost benefit of the risk treatment. Right? The cost benefit analysis is done in evaluation. Is it worthwhile having a risk treatment for this? Selection of the risk treatment is done in risk evaluation. Right? So that is important for you to understand. You all have any questions? You all have just get the concepts into your head, because the exam will not go into all these nitty-gritties. Concept of risk treatment, concept of risk appetite, concept of risk tolerance, what is governance and culture. You must get those major ones into your head. You all have any questions? We can stop for the day and continue next week. Not next week, is a holiday. After that. All right, so have a great weekend. I hope you got some idea about the risk management frameworks. Just note what is important here is you have to just identify and understand the major concepts. That is what is important. Right. And we will next week, what we will do is we will discuss a little bit about risk evaluation. You can read this at leisure. These assurance approaches, I think we went through this capability maturity model. There is one called capability maturity model, and there is another one, capability maturity model integration. All small differences. And the Turnbull one. So we have now more or less covered all the theory parts. Now what is left is the questions. We will start off with the questions in January. And we'll need about 6 to 7 lessons. And only thing is now we are in December, January, February. By March at least try to sit for the exam before you forget all these things. All right. Have a great weekend. Good night. All the best for the season.